Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of our Farm and Ranch podcast. We are here with the one and only Jake Lederle. Jake is an attorney, our favorite people, our attorneys in the land world. He specializes in land deals. As you guys see behind me, we all have mixed emotions about seeing these solar fields, solar farms, and these wind farms go up, and now Jake, I don't know if you get into this, but now lithium is the new game in East Texas. So we're really excited to have you today to kind of elaborate and maybe shed a different light, a different side of the big bad wolf of these energy deals.
Well, sure. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, let's just get started. And like I said, this is a safe space. Just shoot from the hip. I won't be too hard on you. I guess just tell us a little bit about your background and your expertise in energy law, kind of how you got started in this particular field.
Well, sure. I kind of came about this in a roundabout way. I went to law school at UT in Austin, and I thought I was going to be an oil and gas attorney.
Whoop.
We good?
Hey, yeah, I said whoop. You have to kind of give UT a little hard time.
That's right.
But no, that's there we go. Listen, there's listeners here on both sides of the track, and they are die hard. Go ahead, sweetheart.
No, that's right. So I was in law school, and I was going to be an oil and gas attorney, and this old man walked up. He's actually my law partner now, and he was talking about these wind turbines out in West Texas. And I almost walked out of the class. It was a visiting professor. It wasn't very great, so I almost left the class. But I sat down, I listened to him. Then I went up and signed up for his class after that. And he and I got to know each other. I wrote a paper in law school about solar energy. It's one of the first papers that got published. And then he hired me out of law school, and I made partner, and we've been doing it now about a decade since. So that's how I got my start.
That's really exciting. Isn't it funny how your mentors how it turns, full circle?
That's right.
So obviously you kind of had a little, adverse reaction to all this when you got started. So what are the common misconceptions? Maybe you can walk through that with us. I think it's more just unknown. And when it comes to rural buyers and sellers and landowners and neighbors, there's a lot of common misconceptions. Can you walk us through that and kind of maybe where they come from or how we can overcome
Yeah.
that?
And I think a lot of what we see, the internet's everybody's worst enemy. You can find anything you want on the internet to support your argument. And there's a lot of folks out there that, for a variety of reasons, whether it's political or not, we call them NIMBY, not in my backyard. They don't want it anywhere. And they advance these different theories, and a lot of them aren't based in science. Some of them are. We hear concerns of the flashing red lights. That's a real thing. They're out there. We've heard things such as, the vibrations from the wind turbines are going to kill all the earthworms. That's not supported. So really, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And I think a lot of it comes down to, what's on the internet. And there are folks out there that, still to this day, a lot of my clientele are older. That's just by nature. A lot of the landowners are still, they're an older generation, and they still live by the old, a handshake deal is better than a contract. I give you my word, and that's what it's going to be binding. And the reality is we don't live in that world anymore. You have a lot of these energy companies that, they'll tell you what you want to hear, and then they're going to take advantage of you. They're going to sell the project, and then they're going to move on. So, that's just right for there to be issues. And I think the big thing for a landowner to do is you need to get with someone that knows what they're doing, that's been through this, to close all the loopholes. Because at the end of the day, what's in the agreement, the contract, that's what's going to be binding. So that's really what you need to focus on. And there's a lot of different ways you can explore that, in terms of, protecting your land, having setbacks, considering your neighbors. You do want to be a good neighbor. There is that balance between, private property rights in Texas. It's my land. I can do what I want with it. And, doing something that's going to adversely impact your neighbor. So to the extent you can, it's nice to think about in terms of setbacks, visual barriers. You can't really do that with the wind turbines. You're going to see them. I can look 20 miles out from my front door and see the entire Sweetwater wind farm. But when you start talking about solar, for example, there are ways you can protect that view. You can build in vegetative barriers. and other things of that nature to do it. But if you don't know that you can do it, if you don't have an attorney that's going to tell you this is what you need to do, the company's not going to do that. That costs them more money. It doesn't make sense for them to do it because there's no regulations in Texas that are going to help a landowner. We have some regulations that deal with, the decommissioning of wind and solar farms, but that's about it. So really, when it comes down to protecting your land, the state's not going to help you. The state is to maximize power. We've seen it with the pipelines and oil and gas. There's just this big, you know, um, eminent domain power in the state that all these companies have that a lot of folks have had to deal with. Texas supports that power. So right now, there's not a big, huge movement to regulate these wind farms, these solar farms. It gets talked about every session, but usually it gets tabled. So it comes down to the landowner, knowing what he can and can't do to protect his land and protect his community.
Absolutely. And I think maybe even taking a step back for those of y'all out there listening, um, you know, it's one thing to finally grasp the concept that this may be a situation or an option for you to save your ranch. Listen, we can't afford mom and dad's grandpa's farm and spend the family for 7 generations. This is one of the only options to pay the payment or to pay taxes, whatever that may be. And so instead of selling it to someone who may even do the same thing, this may be a last resort for you. So a lot of people say, I'll never do that, but unfortunately we're in a position now where this is the only option. So once we get to this point, you were talking about the neighbors, that's kind of another handshake deal. We do consider our neighbors here in Texas, and we want to do something and make a decision in our land that's also not going to affect the neighbor next door. And mind you, you can have thousands of acres, but your neighbor's your neighbor. So really taking into consideration, if you are at a point to where this is going to be an option, we want to educate you and let you know that you also, once you jump down this rabbit hole, that you really need to protect yourself. And that's why they hire someone like you, that's not only an attorney, but an attorney that specializes in detail in these types of energy deals. Um, you know, there's benefits to leasing, like I just said. Like, hey, this may be your only last resort, and if you're going to make a deal with the devil, so to speak, you might as well get a really good attorney to negotiate with him. So in that regard, um, what are some of the benefits for leasing your land for wind farms versus solar farms?
I think you really hit on the big one. It keeps land in the family. It's a way to preserve that land for generations and to be sure you don't have to sell that land to pay your taxes. I think we're seeing that across the state uh, as the population grows, our taxes are just skyrocketing from all the folks moving in from California and everywhere else. And if you're not able to, maintain those ag exemptions, be able to maintain those property taxes, you have to find a way to be able to make that land work for yourself. And a lot of times, the wind farms and the solar farm is a good opportunity to do that. So I really do think that's the big one. There are the ancillary benefits if you're really, the big green head of, it's green power and yay. But, for the most of the folks I represent, they'd be okay if the wind farms and solar farms would go away. But if they're going to come, they're going to go ahead and take that money. It's going to be in their area. It's going to affect their property. So that's a way for them to make more money, to be able to continue with their cattle operations, with their farming operations, just keep that land in the family for generations and generations. I really do think that is, really the big impact for most landowners in doing one of these projects.
Awesome. So when we talk about you're past the stigma, this is what we got to do. We got to hire somebody to protect us and negotiate the best deal possible for us and the land and the future portfolio of the property and the family. What legal aspects should landowners be aware of when considering their land for any type of renewable energy project?
No, sure. That's a good point. These are 30, 40-page documents. They're not like the old standard producer agency oil and gas. They're very complex agreements. They're written by the wind and solar company's attorneys. I like to say, it's written by an attorney who doesn't speak very good Latin. They're very complicated, and there's a lot of nuances to it. But when I'm, anybody that's ever listened to me give my spiel, I have kind of 5 big points that I think every landowner needs to be aware of before they go down a rabbit hole with one of these companies. You need to look at how they're going to pay the rent, because there's the devil's in the details. These companies might say, we're going to, for solar, we're going to pay you for all your land out there. But really, they're only going to pay you for the land they use, and then they're going to try and give you back land that they're not building on. And the same thing with wind turbines. There's no guarantee that you're going to get a wind turbine. They might, you know, go out there and pay a one-time payment and have roads and collection lines, and then they're encumbering your property. So that's one big point. And then we have to look at the property taxes. We need to make sure if our taxes are going to go up, because in solar they are. With solar, you're going to lose that agricultural exemption, and you're going to get the rollback taxes, and your taxes are going to skyrocket. So you have to find a way to make the company be on the hook for that, kind of treat it like a triple net lease you would in a commercial context. And then on the wind side, we don't see the rollback taxes as much. The footprint is so wide that most folks can continue to farm and ranch their land. We've seen some counties, Cameron County, for example, comes to mind. They went out there and they pulled the exemption around each 1 to 2 acre site on the turbines. And I think as this continues in a lot of these more rural communities who are strapped for cash and who need money to continue to operate, they're going to find ways to, tax these facilities, to tax these landowners. So you need to make sure that gets pushed back onto the company. Then you have the liability issues, insurance issues, and then the big one. When this is over, how's this all going to get cleaned up? How am I going to get my land back? So those really the big 5 you need to look for, you need to look into. I spent a lot of time negotiating leases on those 5 points. That's, if we can't get past those, I tell all my clients, don't bother with this. Let's wait around till the next deal comes along.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And, keeping that core foundation of the 5, I mean, you touched on every aspect. The interesting thing you mentioned was the agricultural exemption, or the exemptions, wildlife or agriculture going away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking to the future, have you thought or maybe seen a possibility of there maybe being an energy exemption?
We haven't heard any big rumblings about that. That could be a good way to do that, but that's not something I think is on the horizon anytime soon. But it is something worth considering. So,
I mean, just think about it. That was the $1 million idea came from me right here, right here.
that's right.
It's one of those things. You have your homestead exemption. I mean, rather than carving out, like you said, the 2 acres around the wind turbine or whatever it may be, an acre around your house. You know, that might be something someone should bring up to legislation, because it would, at the end of the day, you're just trying to help the landowner. The less he has to pay in taxes for, forfeiting his land, to save it. And then also giving to the energy companies and their mission, so to speak. So that was kind of interesting you said that, because that, as a landowner, when you dive down this, we really don't have any experience. We live and breathe agriculture or wildlife in the state of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
But no, those are some really neat points. And, you definitely hit on this. To receive fair compensation and leasing your land, obviously you have to have an expert negotiate the deal. This is not a real estate broker's forte. Like you said, you're 30 to 60 pages of legal documents, so to speak. So you pretty much answered my main question is, hey guys, if you're to the point you're going to do this, don't hee-haw around. Don't talk to your expert cousin over there or your favorite real estate broker that you drink coffee with that sells ranches. This is something that is gonna take a guy like you. Now, when it comes to hiring a guy like you, in the grand scheme of things, what financial investment are we talking about hiring an attorney?
Hiring an attorney to negotiate a lease, that's a good question. Don't want to give away the keys of the kingdom, but attorney's fees can be, it just depends on what level you're involved and how nitty and gritty these negotiations get. They could be as small as a few $1,000s to 10, 15, $20,000. A lot of that's going to depend on how much leverage you have in the deal as well. But one of the, I guess, good things about these deals is the companies have gotten the understanding that most landowners aren't going to want to pay $20,000 to an attorney not to get a deal done. So they've come in and said, if you'll sign a lease with us, we will reimburse you for your attorney's fees. So that's a good incentive to, for the landowner, if they do want to get involved, to let them hire an attorney. They pay their attorney like they always would. And if they do sign a deal, they can get reimbursed for it. But that's kind of the gambit. Um, not every deal is the same. If you have 40 acres, you're not going to have the same type of negotiating leverage you will if you have 10,000 acres. So you're not going to have the same financial impact. Um, and one thing that does benefit folks is, especially with wind farms, where there's a lot of landowners involved. A solar farm is one, two landowners. It's 15 to 3,000 acres. But in a wind farm, if you all band together and you form kind of a group, you're able to give each of yourself more leverage. You're able to operate off of each other, and that also does reduce the impact you have to pay to attorneys to negotiate the deal out. So, for
Okay,
example.
so I was taking notes over here. So ideally, if you're in this type of situation, what's the average size if you're looking to maybe approach your land for a wind farm lease versus a solar lease? I think you were saying 15 to 3,000 acres. Can you kind of spitball the average there for our audience?
Yeah, so a typical wind farm in Texas is going to be between 100 to 300 megawatts. And I say a megawatt of solar takes about 5 to 7 acres, depending on who you're looking at. So total, the company would need around between 15 to 3,000 acres to build it. So we've seen projects get put together with 10 or 15, 2 to 300 acre landowners. So it can happen. So if you and your neighbors decide this is what I want to do, and you all band together and do it, you'll be able to put enough block of land together to do it. Now, if you're just a 200-acre landowner, your options are going to be limited. There are other situations out there like community solar that doesn't require as much land. That might be a you know 50-acre solar project that has different economics. It's not being pumped into the grid like the utility scale size is. So there is that avenue. But right now, the big trend is for utility scale solar. Um, and when you're looking at wind, the wind farm, could be anywhere between 10,000 acres to 100,000 acres or more, just depending on the size. The Roscoe wind farm out here, which is around 780 megawatts, probably spans about 60,000 acres between everybody they have leased. But that's usually is going to take multiple landowners, multiple people in a community buying in and signing up.
Okay, so you mentioned community solar and utility solar. Can you give us a brief overview of the difference of those two items?
Sure. The best way to think about the difference, community solar, um, it's going to be much smaller. They don't connect in the grid, so they don't have the same regulations. They're not going into the ERCOT system um, like the utility scale sizes. So they're able to offer higher rates. We've seen rates for community solar be, 3 and 4,000 an acre to lease the land to them. They're much smaller. They're, feeding the community. Whereas utility scale, they're pumping the power into the grid, and once it's in the grid, it's just going wherever the power goes. So
Awesome. That was pretty easy to understand. Like I said, there's not much outside of the Google machine. There really isn't a lot out there. So, having an expert like yourself, you're not just the guy that, writes these leases and defends them, but you're also a major resource of knowledge because it's not like these energy companies are just putting out a how-to, so to speak,
that's
uh,
right.
out there. I like what you said, thinking outside the box. If you and your neighbors can collaborate and get together, um, really, I think the biggest stigma with uh, energy deals is the community relations. 'Cause people can see a wind farm for hundreds of miles away, and that pisses off a lot of people based on their knowledge of whatever that energy all the politics mean to you. So when it comes to just neighborly relations and just the general community, like maybe your town or your county, what are some recommendations for someone who's kind of getting over the hurdle to get into this and make that decision? Because I feel like that's kind of the hardest decision to make, is getting past all the extra that have nothing to do with the deal.
And that's a tough one. There's really not a lot that you can do if you're in a community that is opposed to these projects. there's nothing you can do that's going to change their mind. They're opposed at a principle level, um, and they're not going to be moved off of that point, whether they're right or wrong. So I think for a landowner, and they're concerned about that, you have to consider that, but you also have to consider, what does this do for my land? What does this do for my family? Is this project going to come or not? Um, so a lot of times, it's not the right answer. But a lot of times it's going to come down to making sure you're protected in the lease. That if these neighbors do try and interfere in this project, or say you've damaged their property, and they're suing you for that, that you need to be indemnified from the wind or solar company. There was a lawsuit back in 2008 against Nextera on a nuisance issue, and the landowners lost that case. But that is a present thought. But that really is the answer. You can't do anything to help protect your neighbors. They're going to be opposed to it. Now you can think in terms of you know do on to one what you do to yourself. Don't put a turbine. Let the wind company put a turbine right on their property boundary. Make the wind company set that turbine back. Don't put it right up next to their house. If it's solar, talk to them in terms of
Unless you don't like your neighbor.
unless you don't like your neighbor. That's right. That's right. I've got some stories, but I won't go into them on here. And with solar, build in vegetative boundaries. Have the company plant rows and trees so that as they mature, you stop to see the solar farm. You're going to see it when it's built, but the idea being eventually it will fade into the background. I think that's what you need to think in terms of do what you can to help your neighbors, but at the same time, don't let that be your only decision. If you're looking at losing your land versus, making your neighbors happy, screw your neighbors and save your land. So,
Yeah, if they ain't doing a GoFundMe for you, then it's time to go, right?
that's right.
Yeah, like I said, it's not an easy topic, but unfortunately, you got to put pride aside, and if it's between losing your property and saving it, then this is an option you can definitely leverage.
That's
Um,
right.
you know, what impacts and trends do you see coming in the future for renewable energy in the industry? You're kind of the finger on the pulse, so we don't see what's coming down the pipeline.
Right. The big trend I've seen here recently is battery storage. There's been a big discussion in Austin ever since we had the freeze a couple years ago of, all these wind and solar farms, they froze out and they shut down, and that impacted the grid. So there's a big movement now to get dispatchable power into the grid. And right now that's through lithium batteries. And that can be a good opportunity as well. That's a much smaller site. It's maybe 10 to 20 acres. Um, if you've ever seen what a substation looks like, it's not much different than that. A lot of times they look like the big cargo containers you'd see on a ship, um, but that is a new wave, and they pay a lot of money for that land as well. So that's a new trend we're seeing. And you touched a little bit on it earlier. It kind of goes hand in hand with these batteries as there's this big new push for lithium ion batteries for storage and for Tesla and all the electric cars. Uh, there's the brine mining in East Texas and Arkansas. How are we going to get this lithium? A lot of places it's in Russia and all these countries that we don't have the best foreign relations with right now. But in Texas and Arkansas, we do have um, a big formation of lithium. It's the Smackover formation. So that's a new wave we're starting to see, and we've seen some geothermal down around the coast where companies are looking to come in and you know essentially take the hot water and make power from that. Um, and beyond that, there is a move towards green hydrogen, which is a can of worms in and of itself. It's going to be coupled with a wind farm and a solar farm. And what they're doing there is they're taking your water, they're running it through what's called an electrolyzer to break that water down into oxygen, into hydrogen. Um, there's a lot of water that gets involved in that, so that's a whole another conversation whether that's good for Texas or not, because the amount of water these hydrogen facilities are taking can be very eye-opening. So, um, but it can be a
I
good
will.
area. If you're in a panhandle or West Texas where there is um, a congestion in the grid, you can't get new power into the grid, but you have all these good wind and solar resources. that's where a lot of companies are looking. How do we get this behind the meter power? Um, to do something with this and let the landowners still, get paid for using their land.
It's so interesting that you touch base on that because one, we just came from a really big uh, Texas Alliance of Land Brokers meeting where a oil and gas company is getting into lithium extraction or however that works. Believe me, it was all news to us that part of Texas, excuse me, lost the earbud. Part of Texas actually has lithium, and they're now soliciting for uh, landowners that have minerals. So that was kind of like an aha moment as real estate agents of, hey, we have to know a little bit about oil and gas to get our clients to the right consultant or attorney. And so now we have this coming along. Man, let me tell you, I have a listener right now that is perking up when you said hydrogen because his neighbor is about to put a hydrogen plant or he's advocating for it, and it's more than
Hmm.
likely going to happen out in West Texas, and they are mortified. And
Hmm.
this is all new technologies in the energy world that we're just now hearing about, and they're like, how did I not know this? How did I not know how to leverage? What's the impact? How do I negotiate the best deal? So thank you for introducing us to a lot of that. And I'd love to have you back on the podcast to go into the intricacies of that because, water is huge to us.
Hmm.
Between the cedar trees, drinking 66 gallons a day and everybody moving here and the influx of illegals, I don't care who you are. There's more people in our area than there ever were before. And the census department and, all our counties doing all these statistics on our growth, it's been shot out the window. So you can see how this could definitely affect, at least on the water side with the hydrogen plants and things of that nature. So, I appreciate your insight on that. Um, is there any other resources? I was kind of dumbfounded when you were like, hey, there's me in the Google machine. But, is there any other resources or organizations, landowners can turn to for guidance and support?
The Texas Southwest Texas Cattle Raiser Association, they have some resources. The Farm Bureau, but when it really gets down to it, um, there's really not a lot of resources out there. There's some folks that they've done it, they've been around the block, but it takes finding the right person. Um, that's looked at enough of these deals that knows what the market is to be able to guide you through the process. Um, and the vast majority of attorneys working in this sector, they work for the companies. They work for the energy companies out of Austin and all over. So there's us, there's a few other folks that do it, but it really just comes down to oftentimes it's the attorney that's done this hundreds and thousands of times. That's usually going to be your best resource.
Yeah, until we get into it more and there's more lawsuits and more deals being done, and someone puts a lot of those educational pieces out there, it's kind of hard. But I appreciate the fact that you're going out there and even coming on this podcast. With that, farm and ranch brokers and farm and ranch specific agents are kind of the gatekeeper to these landowners. What information would what advice or information do you have for us in the seat of the influencer of the landowner?
And how to respond to one of these deals. I think it's just educating them on this, that here are the pros and cons. If you don't do it, the project could still come. Here's the money you stand to make from it, and kind of walking them through the process. Um, really, I think the best advice would be, trying to determine whether the landowner really wants to do this or not. And if they do, getting them to the right people that can walk them through this process. And not letting these companies. So what a lot of companies like to do is they hire these folks, the landmen. They're just another off breed of the oil and gas landmen. They hire folks that are really personable. They've got a good old Texas accent, and they're very convincing. They want to convince these landowners they're friends, and they get them to sign things that they shouldn't sign. So I think that's the best is, walking them through the process, not letting them sign anything, until they've talked to an attorney, talked to somebody that knows what they're doing, because that can have impacts on what you're doing. So
Absolutely. I tell everyone, real estate agents aren't created equal. Surgeons, attorneys, they have their license, but they all specialize in a different field and what they're passionate about. So making sure that you get them to the resource. And I think that was kind of interesting when we were at our Texas Alliance of Land Brokers meeting. This was an oil and gas company getting into this business. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, who are the experts already in this business? And what do they know that you don't? Because I mean,
Yep.
it's a fair assumption. I mean, I started real estate. I didn't know anything and got my license, and I knew about ranches, but to
Hmm.
evaluate the experts in the field and those little red flags or green flags, we're like, okay, we're here. We need to pivot and maybe talk to these three people for some consulting. So,
Yeah.
um,
And I think
I think
you want to talk to your attorneys, and you want to talk to your CPA as well. Especially because that can have tax implications on you if you're in a certain tax brackets. Um, you need to understand what that would do to your taxes, your estate taxes as well. So I really do think it's a suite of folks that can really help the landowners, the brokers, it's the CPAs and the attorneys that can, really give them the full picture of what they're looking at and best how to proceed against one of these companies.
Man, I appreciate you, and I wanted to let everybody know I joked about the topic of the podcast being the big bad wolf, but as you can see, Jake and his office and organization, they're here to help you. If you're at this point, they know you've kind of been through the ringer, and really, if you're going to dance with the devil on these land deals, you want a serious attorney that's going to negotiate hard for your land and for what's important to you, and we hope you get everything that you're wanting, because obviously if you're at this point and it's that particular scenario, and that's the scenario we kind of are focusing on as a foundation of getting to you at this point. But knowledge is power, and knowing that you're here to help. If you're at this point, this is your job, this is what you do every day. You went to college for it and wrote a paper on it and got published. So guys.
A lot of companies, I've kind of carved out my role in this as being a hard trader. A lot of companies find me very difficult to deal with because, when I get a landowner in, I look at their land and, I view it as, well, what would I do if this were my land? And, a lot of companies know me because I negotiate very hard. As hard as the landowner will go, the landowner wants me to push them off the cliff, I will. If they want me to take them to the edge of the cliff and not push them off, I'll do that as well. Um, but I take a very hard line stance with these companies, and a lot of them don't like it. And I always think it's a badge of honor. We get these landmen that after they've dealt with me one or two times, they'll go on to the next project, and someone's, well, who's your attorney? Well, it's going to be Jake out of Sweetwater. He said, oh, don't hire him. He's going to be horrible to deal with. He'll never get the deal done.
Hey, he's a
I
professional. He
always like
came
to
to
hear
play.
that. And the landowner said, well, thank you for telling me that. Just makes me want to hire him even more. So when we do go down this road with these companies, it's no holds barred. We have a business relationship with these companies. We work with them all the time, but at the end of the day, they have a goal and I have a goal. And I'm going to do my best to get the landowner the best deal possible.
You heard it first, guys. We'll get you to Jake. Hopefully, someone out there benefited from all this new information. We're very thank you for putting up with me. I know I'm not the easiest sometimes, but really just wanted to let you know that Jake's not the big bad wolf. This situation, for some it's not ideal, but there are people that are compassionate that are here to help you through it. Jake, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Lindsay.